we said we do not support the amendment that Majority Leader Reid has filed to fund Obamacare. When we told our constituents we oppose Obamacare, we meant it. Yeah. So we are not going to be complicit in giving Harry Reid the ability to fund Obamacare. Would Majority Leader Harry Reid be able to proceed and fund Obamacare if 41 Republicans stood together against cloture?
Well, but the thing is, I think the senator from Texas may be confused. We're not going to be voting on the amendment. We have the chance to vote on the amendment after the vote on cloture. The vote on cloture tomorrow is a vote on ending debate on a bill we support. The amendment that you're talking about...
The time for the colloquy has expired. Okay. Is there objection to the unanimous consent request offered by the Majority Leader?
Madam President? Madam President?
The senator from Utah.
Reserving the right to object, I requested to modify the request made by the Majority Leader.
I've already turned that down.
And he turned that down, and in light of the fact that he's turned it down, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Madam President, what we just witnessed was an effort by Senator Harry Reid to move the votes, the critical votes, on keeping the government open to this evening. What we've just heard from the Republican side of the aisle is they want to stall and delay this even more. It isn't just a matter of losing a legislative day in the Senate.
The time is still under the control of the Republicans.
How much time? I know there was time yielded by Senator Reid to the Republican side to Senator Grassley. So how much time is remaining at this point on the Republican side?
The alternating time occurs at the bottom of, I think, at 4:30.
The alternating time occurs at 4:30 p.m.
And at 4:30, then the Democrats are recognized?
That is correct.
And what time is it now? Would the chair take notice?
4:29.
Madam President, if I could, Madam President.
Senators are reminded to address each other each in the third person, not by their first and last names.
Madam President.
The senator from Tennessee.
If I could, I would just like to say, in response to my good friend from Illinois, it's not the Republican side that's asking to stall. We only have 2 Republican senators that are wanting to push this off, and so I don't want that to be mischaracterized, if I could, and to say that it's my understanding that the reason that we're putting this off is because they would like for people around the country that they have notified to be able to watch. And so it's that process of making sure that everyone watches that I think is slowing this down. It's not the entire Republican side. I think most Republicans, I know all Republicans other than 2, would actually like to give the House the opportunity to respond in an appropriate way. With that, I yield the floor, and I've enjoyed this very much.
Madam President.
The next hour is controlled by the majority.
Madam President.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Madam President, let me start by acknowledging what the senator from Tennessee just said. I have worked with Senator Corker on so many issues, bipartisan issues, and I salute him for his efforts to try to find bipartisan solutions. And what he said, I think, is indicative of the problem that we face now. 2 senators, and it is their right under the Senate rules, a senator from Utah and the junior senator from Texas, have decided that they want to delay this another day. They want to stall this another day. It isn't just losing a legislative day, and it's more. Look how long it took us to bring up the House continuing resolution. If I'm not mistaken, they voted on it last Friday. We are thinking about voting on it tomorrow, 7 days later. It tells you that the Senate rules, even at their best, with 1 member objecting, can mean that measures take a long, long time. Ordinarily, it just means we waste time. But this time, it's critically more important because the government will not be funded. Come Tuesday morning, all across America, we will not fund the government because of the actions just taken on the floor of the Senate by Senator Cruz of Texas, Senator Lee of Utah. They are trying to slow this down and to create a political crisis. A political crisis. They are playing high-stakes poker with other people's money. because the victims of this political crisis will not be the senators and House members. There'll be a lot of innocent people, a lot of workers across America who just want to get up and do their work for this government to make this the greatest nation on earth. Some of them are risking their lives in uniform. They'll be paid, but their paychecks will be delayed. What it means is they have to contact their wives and spouses back home come Tuesday if this Cruz and Lee delay continues. They'll have to contact them and say, honey, maybe a little difficult this pay period. It doesn't look like we're going to get a paycheck because Congress has shut down the government. There are others, too, all across America, thousands of them, doing their work for this government. At the FBI, at intelligence agencies, it'll go dark. Why? Why have we reached this point? Why do these two senators, think this is in the best interest of the United States of America? We've heard reports from economists. This cannot help our nation. Shutting down the government, failing to extend the debt ceiling, we're going to find ourselves in a position where this economy is going to start to stall. People will start searching their savings accounts and notice that their investments are going down in value. Why? Because two Republican senators insisted that we couldn't speed up this vote and move this process forward to solve this problem. The best explanation they can give us, they've notified their friends in the media and those on email to stay tuned for Friday. Friday's going to be the big day, their big day in the sun. And so we're delaying our actions here for a full day so that they can get adequate publicity for what they're about to do. That's not in the best interest of the Senate. It's sure not in the best interest of the United States of America. I listened to Senator Reid. He made an effort to come forward and expedite this process. You know, there are people outside this door who have warned us not to do that. They said, you send this back over to the House, it gives them time to do something. And Senator Reid has said from the start, we will not be party to delaying this critically important decision. There's too much at stake. We're going to move this through as quickly as we can, and we have. At this point now, it is on the shoulders of those two senators, those two Tea Party Republican senators who have decided that they want to close down the government, or at least come closer to running the risk of closing down this government. That isn't in the best interest of dealing with the issues that face America. Madam President, my job on the Senate Appropriations Committee is to be the chair of one of the most important subcommittees, the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Never dreamed I'd have this responsibility, but with the passing of a genuine American hero, Dan Inouye of Hawaii, this mantle fell on my shoulders. Almost 60% of all the domestic discretionary funds spent by the federal government go through this one subcommittee. There's a lot of hard work involved in putting the appropriation together, but when you consider the responsibility we have, it's even more substantial. This appropriation supports our men and women in uniform and the nation's intelligence agencies that keep our country safe. Let me tell you what a government shutdown is going to mean to them. A government shutdown is going to mean a lot of hardship. I mentioned earlier, uniformed troops calling their spouses to say, we're not going to get our paycheck on time this month. Try to make do if you need it. Something totally unnecessary, something brought on by action on the floor of the United States Senate just minutes ago by two Republican senators. There are more than 700,000 civilian employees at the Department of Defense, and half of them will be sent home immediately come Tuesday morning. Sent home. Men and women who work at military installations in the Pentagon sent home from work. Over 80% of the Department of Defense civilians work outside the Pentagon. 12,000 of them work in my state. They'll be given notice on Tuesday morning. You have to go home. Why? Because there was a promise made for some publicity on Friday by a couple senators. That's unacceptable. A substantial number of these hard-working men and women are going to be furloughed because of already face furlough because of a sequester. And now if we allow this government to shut down, once again, they'll have to figure out how to make ends meet. Men and women who are just trying to keep us safe in this country, many of them risking their lives, are now going to be pawns in this political game. It's an unconscionable breach of faith. The risk to national security imposed by a shutdown is not confined to the military. It will cripple our intelligence community. These men and women serve as our country's first line of defense. We rely on their agencies to warn us of threats, to prevent terrorist attacks and inform leaders making critical national security decisions. The intelligence community workforce, overwhelmingly made up of civilians, and the greatest portion of them will be furloughed because of the government shutdown, a government shutdown that is totally unnecessary, brought on by the House Republicans and 2 Senate Republicans. This shutdown will be quick, and the principal agencies will largely go dark within 4 to 8 hours of the shutdown order. America, its intelligence agencies that keep us safe, are going to go dark because of this political strategy. If the government shuts down, all DoD work will stop on weapons and equipment maintenance not directly related to war. Bases will not be maintained, which will see a degradation of facilities. You'll see massive disruptions all across this country. The Rock Island Arsenal in my state, a critical arsenal that supports more than 54,000 active reserve and retired military. The arsenal is the largest employer in the Illinois-Iowa region, with more than 7,500 employees and more than 70 federal and commercial tenants. The facility adds $1 billion to the local economy, supporting 14,000 jobs in the region. A government shutdown will throw production schedules at Rock Island into chaos as orders get cut back and civilians sit at home under furlough. I couldn't imagine going to these men and women and saying the reason that you've had this furlough and can't come to work is because 2 senators decided they needed some publicity on Friday. Putting the arsenal's capabilities at risk degrades the defense industrial base. It jeopardizes our national and local economy. Same thing is true at Scott Air Force Base. In a shutdown, its 5,000 civilian employees would experience the same loss of pay as everybody else. Scott's 5,500 active duty military personnel and their families would have to get by on savings and reserve while they wait for reimbursement with later paychecks. When you go through these lists, and the lists are long, you think how totally unnecessary this is. Senator Reid has come to the floor repeatedly to tell you what the American people think. 80% of the American people think this is foolish and wasteful. Foolish and wasteful. 75% of Republicans have given up on this strategy. And yet, a handful of willful members of the House and Senate decide they're just going to keep going down this road. Well, I hope that they'll have some revelations in the next few minutes or hours, maybe overnight. I hope that they'll reconsider what they've done here, the risk that they're putting this country at. It's just not appropriate. It's not fair. I listened to them try to explain how they can have a faux filibuster for 21 hours and then turn around and unanimously vote for the next item up on business. It may be an argument that the senator from Texas thinks he understands clearly. Most Americans don't understand what he was saying for 21 hours and then turning around and voting overwhelmingly to move forward on the bill. And let me make one thing clear before we go any further. Obamacare, as we know it, is already funded. It's already funded. Senator Harry Reid is not going to be funding Obamacare. It's already funded, and it will be. It will be under appropriation bills that we pass and CRs. And this notion that he's somehow going to do something sinister, let me remind its critics. We have brought this to a vote in the Senate, one of the most historic votes, painful votes. Senator Reid, you may remember when our colleague, Senator Ted Kennedy, was brought here on the floor of the United States Senate to vote for that Affordable Care Act. The man was literally dying of cancer. But this meant so much to him that he came down here for the vote at great personal risk and sacrifice. It was great to see a smiling face come through that door again, but we knew we'd never see him again, and we didn't. That's the kind of sacrifice that was made. The votes were taken. And then in the next presidential election, there was a referendum on Obamacare. And the American people were clear. They re-elected President Obama. They rejected Governor Romney's promise to repeal Obamacare. These members, at least 2 of them, can't accept the verdict of history. They continue to want to fight this battle. But as I've said, they're fighting it at the expense of a lot of innocent people across America, at the expense of some of the best workers in the world, those in military uniform and those in the civilian capacity. Do a great job for us every single day. Picking on them, deciding to make them the object of this political exercise is beneath us as a great institution. Let me close by saying this. I will give credit to Senator Cruz. when he was doing his 21 hours, I asked him point blank, so you want to eliminate the protection in Obamacare that says that health insurance companies can't discriminate against children and families that have pre-existing conditions? Yes, he said, I do. I want to eliminate all of it. And I said, you want to eliminate the provision that says you can't limit the coverage in a health insurance policy so people have enough money for a serious illness and cancer therapy and surgery? I want to eliminate it all, he said. You want to eliminate that protection for families to keep their kids on their own health insurance policies up to age 26? Young people looking for jobs who may not have health insurance, you want to eliminate that too? I want to eliminate every bit of it. He was consistent, consistently wrong, because he fails to understand what working families across America face every single day, what 50 million uninsured Americans face with no protection, no peace of mind. God forbid he ever spends a moment as the parent of a sick child without health insurance. I've been there. You never want that experience in your life for yourself or anybody else. I asked Senator Cruz to tell us about his own personal health insurance, since he's decided he's going to be the arbiter on health insurance for the rest of America and for Congress. He won't give me a straight answer on how he has his own health insurance for his family. I think he owes it to us. He's told us a lot about his great family, and there's some wonderful stories. When it comes to this issue, he ought to tell us. Where does he get his health insurance? Who pays for it? What's the employer's contribution? What's the tax deduction taken by your employer, if any, for your health insurance? These are legitimate questions. He's raised these questions about millions of families across America, said they're just fine, we can do without Obamacare. Let's hear his explanation of how he protects his family when it comes to health insurance. I don't think that's an unreasonable question. After all, he's the one who raised the issue. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Delaware.
Madam President, I wanted to speak for a moment about manufacturing. As you know, I'm passionate about manufacturing, about the good quality jobs manufacturing brings to our communities. But what I am also passionate about is that this body needs to stop manufacturing crises. What we just heard in the last few minutes was an exchange between my friend, the senator from Tennessee, and two of his colleagues, the senators from Texas and Utah, that summarized that what's happened in this chamber today is the extension of a manufactured crisis, a purely artificial extension that is continuing, as the senator from Illinois said at great detail and with great insight, to put at risk our recovering economy, our men and women at arms, our nation's standing in the world. This is a wholly manufactured crisis without purpose. It seems to me in the 3 years that I've been here in the Senate, it feels an awful lot like Groundhog Day. I was sitting in that very chair presiding over this body as we were closing in on a government shutdown when I'd only been here a few months. And I've never forgotten getting a message from a constituent at home. Her husband was at that very moment serving our nation flying medevac missions in Afghanistan. And I got a simple note. Is it possible that because you all can't do your jobs, that my husband and I won't be getting a paycheck next week while he does his job for our nation overseas? We have, in the 3 years I've been here, seen needless fights, a near default on our nation's debt, a near defunding of our federal government's operation, and today we see not a difference of meaning, but a difference purely of substance and style, purely of superficial style. As the senator from Tennessee pointed out, the objection to the majority leader's request that we proceed now to a vote was purely for the convenience of two senators who have sent out a lot of press releases and who want more attention. Madam President, we can't continue to play chicken with the American people, the American economy, and continuing the services of the federal government. Now, I know my colleague, the senator from Louisiana, who is one of the leaders on the Appropriations Committee, is here to offer some insight and some comments about the value of appropriations, about the great work that our chair, Senator Mikulski, has led us in this year. There are so many other ways that this manufactured crisis is just the latest in a series of disappointing failures to lead by a few of our colleagues. The chair has allowed us to go through subcommittee markups and full committee markups on 11 appropriation subcommittee bills. And if those bills could be taken up and passed on this floor, we could fix a lot of the things that challenge our nation. And I'd like to yield the floor, if I might, to the senator from Louisiana so she might inform this body about some of the important work that she and her subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, on which I'm honored to serve, has been able to do this year.
Thank you. Madam President,
The senator from Louisiana.
I thank the senator for yielding just for a question, and I really appreciate his leadership as an appropriator. Senator Mikulski was on the floor earlier today, the leader of our committee. And the debate about how much to spend, what we should spend our money on, does the senator understand that that could be done, and it is done in the appropriations process? And if we could just get past this manufactured crisis, we could actually accomplish what many senators want to do, which is to discuss the level of spending. We can't even get there because we're stuck in a manufactured crisis by the senator from Texas. Is that your sense of where we are?
That's absolutely my understanding. And, Madam President, one of the things that my friend, the senator from Louisiana, knows better than any is that the role of the Appropriations Committee and its subcommittees is to perform oversight, is to weed through programs in the federal government and to strengthen and support those that are effective and are making a difference, but to narrow or shut down or trim or close those that aren't. And if we continue to lurch from crisis to crisis, from short-term continuing resolution to continuing resolution, we never get that good work done. So, Madam President, I'd welcome any further comments that my colleague would like to make about what the Homeland Security Subcommittee of Appropriations has made possible and why that matters, what difference that makes to the people of Louisiana and of our country.
I thank the senator, and let me, if I could, Madam President, say a few words about the bill that I have the privilege and the responsibility of chairing, the Homeland Security Bill. It's a $42 billion appropriation bill that I'm very proud to say I've worked with my Republican colleagues, with the senator from Indiana, Senator Coates, over the last 6 months to draft and fashion a bill in many public meetings, in public forums, at the Appropriations Subcommittee level, at the Appropriations Full Committee level. Our bill was negotiated in good faith, Republicans and Democrats compromising over important things like how many border agents should we have, security agents should we have on our border? How many detention beds can taxpayers afford? How many do the Republicans want? How many do the Democrats want? What are some of the important aspects of the immigration reform, and how do we build a technologically superior border that allows trade and commerce but keeps out terrorists and people that or undocumented that do not have the proper certification to come into the country? Those are the kinds of things that we that ran for public office wanted to get here to work on, not to sit in an empty chamber with people because they can't get their way or colleagues get their way 100% of the time, all the time, shutting down the process. So as chair of the Homeland Security Committee, I most certainly can add my voice to the appropriators and to the members that say it's time to move on, and let's do so. But before I get into the specifics of that, I want to say just a word about an issue that is so critical to Louisiana and to states like Texas, from Senator Cruz's home state. You would never know this because I don't think he said a word about this issue in the 22 hours that he was on the floor. But I know a little something about Texas, my neighboring state, know a lot about Mississippi and Alabama and Florida from the Gulf Coast. I've represented my state for now almost 18 years in the Senate and grew up along the Gulf Coast. I just want to make sure everybody understands this, that in 14 days, there are going to be over 1 million people in the United States, many in Texas, many in Louisiana, many in Florida, some in Massachusetts, et cetera, that are going to basically see the value of their home, the equity in their home, go poof, poof. Their equity would have been $200,000 this week, or $400,000, or $600,000, or $2 million. This is an equal opportunity destroyer. Because last year, Congress passed Bigger Waters, which was supposed to fix the flood insurance program. Fix it. Make it sustainable. Make it budget, make it from the red to the black. Make the deficit go away. Help the program to be more sustainable. I understand that. The problem is the way the bill was passed, it is going to, in a few days, literally go poof to people who have thought they had equity in their home, but because there is a provision in the Bigger Waters flood insurance bill that says basically this: when you put your home up for sale, when you sell your home, the grandfathered rate that was attached to your home for flood insurance is immediately dispensed with. So anyone selling their home that happens to have a subsidized flood insurance rate, which is lower than the private market for good reason, which I'll explain in a minute, their house becomes valueless. Okay, now let me repeat this. This is not about your flood insurance going up. This is not about losing your job. It's not about not being able to show up for work because the government shuts down, which is a big problem. This is a real big problem for a million families because the house that you paid for, that you lived in, that you thought had some equity so you could retire on that equity or send your kids to college, poof, gone. Now, I would like to focus on fixing that problem. And I know there are many people in Texas that would like to fix it as well, because when I go over there, I hear from them. And when I go to Louisiana and Mississippi and Florida, I hear from people. We can't even get to a flood insurance bill because, Senator, we're on the floor talking about an issue that's completely manufactured. This is not manufactured, ladies and gentlemen. The flood insurance issue is like real. The flood insurance issue is a bill that actually passed, and we have only like 14 days to fix a part of it. At 5 o'clock, in 5 minutes, I'm going to a meeting in a senator's office, Senator Merkley, who's the chair of the subcommittee, and we're going to try to work on this. But to do this, we need cooperation, Senator. We need cooperation from all of our members to say, well, that might not be a problem in my state, but I can understand what Senator Landrieu is saying, and I can understand what some of the Republicans are saying. Let's see what we can do to fix this so people's equity does not just vanish into thin air and cause lots of pain and suffering. But we can't even talk about real issues because we have to talk about manufactured crisis. Now, I see some of my colleagues on the floor, and I know they understand that the chairman asked us to come and talk for just a few minutes about our appropriation bills, so I'll just try to do this in like 4 minutes, and then I'll submit what I have to do for the record, because when Senator Mikulski asks you to do something, you need to go ahead and do it. So I need to go ahead and put this in the record for my Homeland Security bill. But should this government shut down, which could happen, because, as it's been explained, we have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, not many, senators that have just decided to manufacture a crisis about the continuing resolution and paying our bills, which we owe, and every responsible non-deadbeat person in the world pays their bills. I don't know why we can't. But anyway, because of that, the Homeland Security bill that we've worked on, that's been negotiated, may I say, without disagreement. I mean, this is kind of unheard of, really, to have a bill. Let me just say, we had disagreements, but we worked them out. I mean, there were different views, but we worked them out. Our bill is, and we had big things to work out, like this big new project that's being built in Kansas. I was not very supportive of it. But I had to listen a lot, I had to think, I had to negotiate, and I ended up putting a big project in this bill that I didn't 100% go along with, but I was convinced by colleagues for different reasons. The White House weighed in and others, and so it was a compromise. The bottom line is I've got a $42 billion bill that supports our borders, that keeps commerce going, that keeps FEMA going. We have a terrible flood, Senator, in your home state. I see the senators from Colorado and the senator from Minnesota who absolutely knows what floods are. FEMA is trying to operate there. What do we tell people on Monday? Sorry, we can't come help you. Get back into your home, get your children in school, get this hospital built again. So I'm going to submit the rest of my statement for Homeland Security for the record. But we've got, phones to answer, we have people to serve, we have borders to secure, we have trade to move next week. Shutting down the government is simply not what we should be doing. We should be fixing it, making it more efficient, saving money where we can, and serving the 350 million people in this country and around the world that depend on the American government to function. Inclusion, let me say this. I had Marriott Corporation tell me today, Marriott, conservative, excellent company, but conservative leaning from their top. Marriott told me today, Senator, would you please say when you can that the government is our biggest customer? Because when people think of government, they think of only government jobs. Marriott Corporation, one of the largest corporations in the country, their largest customer is the federal government. We buy a lot of goods and services. When we shut down, when we hesitate, when we don't operate with confidence, it affects every business in the world. And if Marriott is going to take a big hit, can you imagine the hits that smaller companies take that can't take that hit or that break? So on behalf of Marriott, on behalf of other companies that are going to get hit, please, if people would realize the government has a lot of impact on the private sector, and it's not fair to hurt our economy, any businesses, large, small, conservative, liberal, or moderate, and I yield the floor.
Well, Madam President,
The senator from Delaware.
I'd like to thank the senator from Louisiana for her leadership of the Homeland Security Subcommittee of Appropriations. You just heard in detail a description of how she has worked in a bipartisan, thoughtful, and a detailed and decent way, in a way that crafted a bill where there was compromise, where there was give and take, and where ultimately the bill that's moved through that subcommittee and the full committee and should be ready for action on this floor meets the real needs of our nation, of our homeland, and provides resources and support, whether for the state of Colorado, the state of Minnesota, the state of Delaware, all over this country. And shutting this government down over a needless manufactured crisis between now and Monday is the height of irresponsibility. So, Madam President, if I might, I'd like to yield, if I could, to the senator from Colorado.
Madam President.
The senator from
Louisiana, while she's here, not just for your words and not just for reminding us that this isn't about, who can scream the loudest on cable television. It's about the work that actually needs to get done in the United States Senate on behalf of the American people, but also for all the work you've done over the years on FEMA. It's made a big difference in my state already. They're working well with our local officials and our state officials, and we've got a long, long way to go. And the last thing we need to worry about is whether the government's going to shut down or not. Fortunately, because of work that you did and others did around here, the emergency part of this is going to continue to carry through even if there is a shutdown, but there is a lot of uncertainty that's related to that. So while you were here, I just wanted to thank you for that. I'm sorry that the senator from Delaware has left the floor for a moment because he's been holding it down, and I wanted to ask him a question about his previous work because he was the county executive in Delaware before he was here. I was a superintendent of schools, a mayor, or worked for the mayor. Senator Klobuchar, who's here from Minnesota, was a district attorney, and I think every one of us are completely perplexed by the hostage-taking that's going on around this place. So I'd ask the senator from Delaware, you were the county executive of a county in Delaware, weren't you?
I was.
And I say through the chair, do you think that any county executive or mayor or local official in your state could go very far, well, let me put it this way, wouldn't be run out of town if they threaten the credit rating of their community for politics?
Absolutely not. And I might just say to my friend from Colorado, I had direct experience with this. In the state of Delaware, folks expect us to balance our budgets and to pass them on time and to deliver good services, but also to defend our credit ratings. And the city and the county and the state in which I lived and served all enjoyed AAA credit ratings. And folks in my community understood what that meant, that meant we could borrow money for building sewers, building roads, building schools less expensively, and sustain the quality of our community. Yeah. And our business leaders and our civic leaders understood that to put that at risk was reckless and irresponsible, yet for a manufactured crisis by a few senators, we are facing the shutdown of this federal government a few days from now, And I'm afraid just a few weeks later, the possible default on the sovereign debt of the United States. No one, no responsible elected official where I'm from would do that.
And that's my point. I think we're dealing with something that's so far outside of the mainstream of what political actors, at least in my state, that are elected, that are Republicans or Democrats, would support. I think it's important for us to call attention to that because that's what we're dealing with. And I see the Senator from Minnesota is here. My last observation on this is I can tell you this. If one of us represented a state government that opened and closed its doors or threatened to open and close its doors every single year, I can assure you that they would look to do business would look to do business in some other state, not in the state of which we work. And that's what we're doing to the United States of America right now. We've got so much going for us. The innovators are out in the economy innovating. Natural gas is cheaper than it's ever been. And we can build this economy if only Washington or a few actors in Washington would get out of the way. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The gentlelady the senator from Minnesota is recognized.
I can go by both names. Thank you. Mr. President, I would first like to acknowledge Senator Coons of Delaware for his leadership, and certainly Senator Mikulski, the powerful head of the Appropriations Committee, who's put together a group this hour to talk about public safety and infrastructure and what a government shutdown would mean and what sequestration means when it comes to the progress of this country. You've heard from senators from different parts of the country. Senator Landrieu from the great state of Louisiana talking about the importance of FEMA. No one knows that better than she does after Katrina. What would a government shutdown mean to Louisiana? You look at Colorado. Senator Bennett was here, where they're right now experiencing the horrible aftermath of these floods. And then you look at the state of Massachusetts, Mr. President, Senator Markey. What happened there with our Boston Marathon? What happened there if we were in the middle of a government shutdown and we didn't have the resources that we need? And that's what my focus is going to be about today. Do we want the head of the FBI worried about who he can lay off and who he doesn't? Is that what we want them doing right now? Or the head of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that investigated that bombing in Boston? We want them off looking at, well, what are we going to do if we have a shutdown right in the middle of that bombing? No, that's not what we want happening. That's not how this country runs. Mr. President, I sat and watched the last hour of this debate, and I saw Senator Corker come to the floor and do a fine job of explaining that it is not every Republican in this chamber that is trying to slow this vote down, so we don't even have it today. He focused on 2 Republicans that were doing that, and I think it's very important for the American people to know that the Senate has tended to work in a bipartisan way. We want to move forward. We want to get this bill voted on, and we want to give the chance to the House to come back. No more delay. We need to get this done. Now, much of the focus has been, oftentimes, on what a shutdown would mean in Washington, but my job today, Mr. President, is to talk about what it means in states like yours and mine. As someone who has spent 8 years as the chief prosecutor for Minnesota's largest county, I know the pain of this shutdown would be felt by state and local level officials, by state and local people, right down the line. And not least of all by the first responders and law enforcement officers who rely on federal funding for everything from crime prevention to community corrections programs to drug courts and to simply keeping cops on the beat. There are some who are willing to hold these first responders hostage. There are some who are willing to hold our country hostage just to score political points, Mr. President. The fact of the matter is that a government shutdown would be painful and it would be expensive. These men and women go to work every day protecting the people. While most people may run away from disasters and calamities and tragedies, they bravely run toward them. And they do it selflessly, not because they're looking for fame or glory, but because they're simply doing their jobs. Well, we in Washington have a responsibility to do our jobs. We have a responsibility to ensure that our cops and firefighters and EMTs have the tools to protect the public safely and effectively. And we have a responsibility to pass a resolution that prevents the government from shutting down. We simply can't afford another self-inflicted wound to our economy, as Senator Bennett was pointing out, especially not at a time when things are finally turning around. At 7.3%, our national unemployment rate is at its lowest point since December of 2008. In my state, Mr. President, it's at 5.1%. The housing market is bouncing back, retail sales are up, and so far this year we've added 1.5 million private sector jobs. We're not where we need to be, but we are headed in the right direction, and we need to keep moving forward and not move backwards. And yet here we are again, facing another manufactured crisis that threatens to shut down the government. Last week, House Republicans sent us a continuing resolution they knew had zero chance of passing the Senate. When House Republicans passed a budget tied to defunding the Affordable Care Act, they decided they were willing to risk shutting down the government just to relitigate a law that both the House and Senate passed, the President signed, and the Supreme Court upheld. Will there be changes to that law going forward? I'm sure there will. There always are with large bills. But the answer is not to defund it on a must-pass bill. Even members of their own party agree that this is the wrong thing to do. Senator McCain has called defunding the health care law as part of the CR the height of foolishness and not rational. Even a poll conducted by the conservative Crossroads GPS, headed by Karl Rove, found that independents overwhelmingly opposed shutting the government down just to defund Obamacare. It was a margin, Mr. President, of 58% opposition to 30%. That is independent voters in a poll conducted by Karl Rove's group. In the short term, a government shutdown lasting more than a week would have an immediate effect on economic growth, as the federal government would suspend all non-essential spending. Shutting down the government for 3 or 4 weeks would reduce real GDP by 1.4 percentage points in the fourth quarter. And a shutdown longer than 2 months would likely precipitate another recession. My colleagues in the House like to talk a big game about reducing the deficit and doing what is fiscally responsible. And yet they're willing to mortgage our economy on a political gamble. Pardon me, but that's not how we define fiscal responsibility in my state. Here's something else Minnesotans don't call fiscally responsible: closing our national parks, which generate billions of dollars in tourism revenues every year. If the government shuts down, so will all 368 National Park Service sites. And how about the visa processing centers? During the 1996 government shutdown, more than 500 visa applications and 200,000 passport applications were put on hold. Now you might say, well, why would that affect me? Well, it does. It affects jobs in the United States of America. In a state like Minnesota, where tourism is our 5th largest industry and the source of 11% of our private sector jobs, we simply can't afford to let that happen. We simply can't afford for this critical industry to be hamstrung by political posturing on the other side of the aisle in Washington. In addition to the impact on our tourism sector, a government shutdown would also have serious repercussions for industries like medical technology, something that Minnesota and Massachusetts share. Without funding to keep the lights on at the Food and Drug Administration, the process for approving medical devices and other biotech products would grind to a standstill. These are just a few examples of the industries that would be hurt by a government shutdown. If we use the 1996 impasse as a guide, we can also expect to see delays in the Small Business Administration financing, a suspension of Federal Housing Administration insurance for people buying new homes, new patients denied access into clinical research trials at the National Institute of Health. You've heard correctly. If we can't reach a compromise, we will all feel these negative results. Now I want to get back to the focus of my earlier remarks, and that is law enforcement programs. We must be willing to do the right things for the safety of our people. When it comes to Homeland Security, counterterrorism, and federal law enforcement, rest assured those protections will continue. But in the event of a shutdown, the federal officers who continue going to work protecting the public from violent crimes, gangs, and terrorists won't be getting a paycheck. Instead, they'll be getting an IOU. So basically what we'll be saying to these people is, thanks for putting your lives on the line. We can't pay you right now. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll get back pay when Congress sorts this all out. Is that what we want to say to the people that showed up first at that Boston Marathon bombing? Hey, we got an IOU for you? I don't think so. The strain of a shutdown on law enforcement would come at a time when agencies are already struggling to make ends meet in the wake of sequestration. The new head of the FBI just talked about how sequestration would put him in the place of laying off 3,000 FBI agents. I don't think that's where we want to be in this country. These are cuts to some of the most successful crime prevention and crime-fighting programs out there. Even more frustrating is that Chairman Mikulski and the Senate Appropriations Committee worked across party lines to draft spending bills for 2014 that would provide additional resources for grant programs important to law enforcement. Under sequestration, the COPS program has been reduced by $22 million compared to the funding level the Senate approved. Funding for drug courts has also been slashed, despite the fact that drug courts actually save money to the tune of $6,000 per person. For every $1 spent on drug courts, more than $3 are saved on criminal justice costs alone. And when you factor in the other things like costs to victims and health care, they can save up to $27 per person. Local law enforcement also relies on burn grants, which have been cut by $20 million due to sequestration. As a former prosecutor, I've always believed that the #1 job of government is to protect people. It is to keep people safe. It is to have safe roads and bridges. If we continue to cut, to delay, and deny critical funding for programs like COPS and burn grants, we will be failing in this most basic duty. And I refuse to let that happen. Instead of threatening critical services and our economy with poison pill partisanship, we need to focus on real solutions. This means agreeing to go to conference committee on the budget. For many, many months, Senator Patty Murray, the head of the Budget Committee, has been asking permission to just simply bring our Senate-passed budget to conference committee where it can meet up with the House budget and where we can at least try to work out a long-term solution. Senator McCain and Senator Collins have joined us in this call to be allowed to bring a long-term budget to a conference committee, but we have been met every step of the way with opposition from the other side. That is where we should be working these things out. Instead, we are on the floor today to try to end the brinksmanship on simply keeping the government going. Secondly, we have another problem, and that is that our country will hit its legal borrowing limit as soon as mid-October. And when this happens, we will be asked to do what Congress has routinely done 70 times over the past 50 years, and that is to pay our country's bills. Let me be clear. This is about making good on commitments that we've already made. This is about doing what regular Americans do every month when they pay their credit card bills. As Vice Chair of the Joint Economic Committee and the Chair on the Senate side, last week I held a hearing and released a report examining the economic impact of this brinkmanship. The results weren't pretty, and they're based on history. Let's remember what happened the last time, when we had a showdown on the debt ceiling in the summer of 2011. The United States experienced the cost of protracted brinksmanship on the debt ceiling. As Congress struggled with this issue, the Dow Jones dropped more than 2,000 points, and Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. credit rating. Consumer confidence fell, and we were out over $1 billion in borrowing costs. That is on the backs of the taxpayers of this country. That's what happened in 2011, Mr. President. And if we face another impasse this year, there could be very real ramifications for businesses and for people. Interest rates could rise on everything from credit cards and home mortgages to borrowing costs for businesses, putting a real strain on families and small business owners and stalling the economy, just as we're at a time where we can expand it, just as we're at a time where we're starting to see that stability grow to real growth. Mr. President, our country can't afford to keep lurching from crisis to crisis. It's time for both parties to come together and focus on real solutions. You know what I learned the last 24 hours, the last 2 days, watching what was going on this floor? That there are a few of my colleagues that see this place as a battleground. I see it as a place to look for common ground, and that's what we're supposed to be doing on behalf of the American people. The battleground has to give way. We need to do the work of the American people, find that common ground, come together. We are going to pass a good, clean bill so that we can continue the United States government and move on to work out the details of the budget. That's what we need to do for our first responders, for our police, for our firefighters, for those people that put their lives at risk every day. That's what we need to do for the American people. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, any discussion of the national security impacts of a long-term continuing resolution or potential government shutdown would be incomplete without including the potential impact on America's 22.3 million vets. The good news is that under any scenario, vets would still be able to receive health care thanks to advanced funding for 2014. The bad news is that most other VA programs would be shortchanged under a CR and crippled by a government shutdown. The VA budget would be impacted by the funding shortfalls or stoppages, but America's vets would be the victims. VA advanced funding does not extend to such important programs as disability claims processing, hospital and clinic construction, or VA cemetery operations, to name but a few examples. Given the gravity of the backlogs in the VA claims processing program, the Senate CR includes a provision funding claims processing at the 2014 budget request level. But it does not include a package of reforms and initiatives in the 2014 Senate Milkind VA bill intended to improve productivity, accuracy, and accountability. For claims processing, a CR is less than optimal. A government shutdown could be catastrophic. The current backlog of VA disability claims stands at 435,000, improvement over the high watermark of 632,000 just 6 months ago. But the strides VA has made in addressing the backlog problem will suffer a severe setback under a government shutdown. Currently, the VA processes 5,500 to 6,000 claims a day, a massive improvement in productivity that would be stopped in its tracks by a government shutdown. The longer the shutdown, the more severe the impact. Think of a fender bender in the middle of a busy freeway. Traffic behind the accident backs up quickly, and the backup extends farther and farther as cars pile up behind it. Once the cars are towed away, the backup does not magically disappear. It takes time for traffic to return to normal. The same holds true for an interruption in VA claims processing. The VA estimates that for every week that claims processing would be halted under a government shutdown, it would lose a month of progress in processing claims. Our nation, our vets, cannot afford this delay. Claims processing would not be the only VA program imperiled by a government shutdown. If the government shuts down, funding for payment of mandatory VA compensation, pension, and education benefits would run out by the end of October, denying a lifeline of support to thousands of vets. For anyone who cares about America's vets, the notion of forcing a government shutdown is unthinkable. Mr. President, passage of a clean CR through November 15 is imperative to give Congress time to negotiate a way forward to fund government operations agency through 2014. My subcommittee also funds the Defense Department's military construction program. A government shutdown would have a serious consequence in this area. The furloughing of civilian personnel overseeing construction contracts could not only disrupt and delay ongoing projects, but could provoke contract interruption and increase project costs. A CR prevents new starts So regardless of the level of funding, new Milcon projects could be undertaken in 2014 under a CR. A CR government shutdown would bring DoD's Milcon program to a screeching halt. The CR before the Senate today buys time without any extraneous writers or political histrionics. There is a time and place for everything. The place for political statements is elsewhere. The time for keeping the government operating until a comprehensive appropriations bill can be crafted is here. I urge my colleagues to support the clean CR pending before the Senate. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
This hour of debate being managed in the Senate by Democrats, Republicans controlling the next hour in the Senate. Giving you a quick update on where things stand. Debate continues over a resolution that would fund the federal government past September 30th, which is Monday. Senators are considering a House-passed version that would defund the health care law. Senate Leader Reid unveiled an amendment yesterday that would remove the health care language from the bill. But Leader Reid asked that a vote to end all debate take place this evening. It was objected to by Utah Senator Mike Lee, so that vote to end debate is expected tomorrow. If the Senate goes on to pass the funding bill, House Speaker John Boehner said today that he plans to amend the measure when it gets to the House. The Hill writes that this increases the chance of a government shutdown after Monday. And the Hill also reporting that Senator Reid said today that he has not had a conversation with Speaker John Boehner about avoiding a government shutdown, and he does not plan to. Speaker Reid on the floor now.
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the call to quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm sorry that we're going to have to vote tomorrow and not today. House is waiting for us to do something, finish this, but we have two senators who won't allow us to do that. We've established that an hour or two ago. That's unfortunate. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the following leader remarks on Friday, September 27th. The time until 12:10 be equally divided between the proponents and opponents of the motion to invoke cloture on J.Res 59. The time from 12:10 until 12:30 be reserved for the two leaders. The final 10 minutes under my control. That at 12:30 the Senate proceed to vote on the motion to invoke cloture on J.Res 59. That if cloture is invoked, all post-cloture time be yielded back. The pending Mikulski-Reid Amendment 1975 be withdrawn. No other amendments be in order. That the Majority Leader be recognized to make a motion to waive applicable budget points of order. That if a motion to waive is agreed to. The Senate proceed to vote in relation to Amendment Number 1974. That on dispositions read amendment, the joint resolution be read a third time, and the Senate proceed to vote on passage of the joint resolution as amended, if amended. Finally, all after the first vote in this sequence of votes be 10 minutes, and there be 2 minutes equally divided between the votes.
Is there objection? Without any objection, it's so ordered.
This agreement means, Mr. President, we'll have up to 4 votes tomorrow, beginning at about 12:30. Cloture on J.Res 59, motion to waive budget points of order. The amendment number 1974 and passage J.Res 59 as amended, if amended. I think we'll come in tomorrow about 9:30, and the time will be allocated from that time until 12:10.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.